Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of the Human Classroom. A caveat episode, if you will. Let the listener beware. These are the episodes where we step a little further under the floorboards of education, where the conversation gets less polished, a little more personal and sometimes uncomfortable. These episodes are rooted in moments in other podcast episodes that spark that, we need to talk about that. Or conversations in a hallway with another teacher. Or even moments that I have in a class with a student that make me go, you know what? We should talk about that more. The nitty and gritty aspects of it. Today I want to talk about something that I think lives quietly inside far more adults than we realize. Not just students, adults, teachers, parents, professionals, people who look functional on paper and accomplished in public, but still carry this constant hum of anxiety underneath the surface of everything they do. Because what we call educational success in some people was never success at all. It was simply survival. Sometimes the child who looked like they were doing everything right was not thriving in that classroom. It was a nightmarescape. It was hell for them because they were simply adapting to it. They were learning how to stay quiet, avoid embarrassment, perform perfection, over-prepare, and how to never be caught being wrong, confused, slow, loud, emotional, distracted, or inconvenient. And we praised that child for being so mature, so responsible, and we praised that child for being such a good student. But what if that child was never learning how to learn? And they were simply learning how to survive in a room. You see, classrooms teach much more than academic content. Long before students remember formula, a vocabulary word, or the dates on a history test, they learn something far more immediate. They learn what's safe. They learn what gets approval, they learn what gets corrected, they learn what gets laughed at, they learn what gets eye rolls, what gets sighs, what gets red pen, what gets teacher's sharp tone, what gets the snickers from a classmate in the third row, what gets them beat up in the recess after class, bullied in the lunch lines. And once a learner starts mapping those reactions, the question inside their brain quietly changes. That question is no longer, how do I understand this? That question becomes, how do I make sure I'm not the one who gets it wrong? How do I not look stupid? How do I not become the problem? How do I stay out of the spotlight unless I know for certain I am safe there? That's a different kind of education, folks. That is not curiosity. That is not confidence. That is not healthy challenge. That is vigilance. And it starts in a classroom. I know that room. I lived in it deeply. I think the bullying and the people-pleasing and all of those things started very deeply for me in about the second grade. I remember not having people I could trust and be safe with on the playgrounds. And so that first moment of praise sparked the perfect little people-pleasing, teacher-pleasing student. The one over-prepared, the one who worked herself into knots to make sure the assignment was done correctly and turned in. The answer sounded polished, the paper made sense, the teacher was pleased, the expectations were met. The girl who stayed after to clean up the mess of her peers because she wanted somebody to tell her she was doing good. Because somewhere along the way, my nervous system had learned something that had very little to do with academics and everything to do with survival. If I was useful enough, smart enough, agreeable enough, accomplished enough, Maybe all of my flaws and all of my imperfections would not make me the least valuable person in a room if I tried hard enough. Because when you are the least valuable person in a room, it feels dangerously close to being the least wanted person in a room. So achievement stops being about growth and it becomes camouflage. Gold stars become proof of safety. Good grades become proof of worth. Teacher approval becomes a kind of temporary permission to exhale. And for that kind of learner, it often looks incredibly successful from the outside. Responsible, motivated, mature, high-achieving. But internally, they are not relaxed. They are scanning, constantly scanning. Scanning for disappointment, for criticism, for signs that they are slipping from good into not enough. And it's torture of a whole different kind. And nobody sees it happening. You know, it's even sadder for neurodiverse learners that become pressured to become not the most useless person in the space. It gets louder. Because now we're not just asking a child to learn material, we're asking them to learn material while also managing the invisible labor of existing in the space that was not designed for how their brain processes the information they're being given. They're not going to be the fastest kid in the room every time. They're not going to be the one who can control their body every second of every day. Think about the child with ADHD trying to desperately not look distracted while their mind is ricocheting in 6 different directions. Or think about that autistic learner trying to decode social expectations, sensory overload, fluorescent lights, body stillness, group participation, shifting routines, and academic expectations all at the same time. When you break it down like that, who wouldn't be overwhelmed? Think about the anxious child whose stomach is in knots before the quiz ever hits his desk. Think about the student who already feels slower, louder, weirder, more emotional, more forgetful, more fidgety, more out of sync than everyone else around them. Those learners are not walking into the classroom at a baseline. They are walking in already carrying weight. And when the room still insists on one pace, one posture, one right way to answer, one acceptable volume of movement, one acceptable speed of output, one socially approved version of participation, that learner starts to learn something terrifyingly fast. I'm the mismatch. Not the system, me. So they mask. We've heard the term masking. They tap dance to the tune that's being played. They overcompensate for the spaces where they have gaps. They rehearse answers in their head before saying them out loud 1 billion times. They apologize for existing constantly. They over-explain, hoping you'll be sympathetic and understand that it's not an excuse, but they feel the need to apologize and explain. They stay up too late making sure the assignment is flawless and come to school exhausted. They panic when routines change and they become the funny one, or the invisible one, or the helper, or the perfectionist, or the one who never asks for help. Because every adaptation is an attempt to answer the same desperate question. How do I say acceptable in a room that keeps showing me I do not fit here? And the frightening part is these adaptations do not disappear when the school bell rings for the last time and you're handed your diploma and shifted out the door. Children who learn to survive classrooms often become adults who do not know how to exist without performing. They become adults with crippling test anxiety even in low-stakes situations. Adults who panic and break into sweat before a presentation. Adults who rewrite their emails 6 times because they don't want to sound too demanding or too much. Adults who apologize before they ask a question. Adults who need reassurance that they're doing okay when everyone around them says they are. Adults who equate rest with laziness because they were never allowed to rest. They don't know how to make their bodies stop. Adults who feel physically ill at the thought of disappointing someone in authority. They become the adults who cannot carry and enjoy achievement because achievement never feels finished enough to make them feel safe. They become adults who smile while their stomach is in knots, adults who look high functioning on paper and privately feel one missed detail away from collapse, adults who are praised for being capable while internally they are just terrified of being the person who drops the ball. And many of them do not call this educational trauma. They are calling it just being an anxious person. They call it perfectionism, overthinking, being driven. But very often, what they are really carrying is years of nervous system conditioning that taught them their mistakes are expensive, visibility is risky, and worth is earned through performance and performance alone. And your worth can slip in a heartbeat. So this is where I have to ask the very uncomfortable educational question out loud for all of us, right? Are we shaping our learners, or are they being warped to fit? Because shaping suggests growth. Shaping suggests guidance, scaffolding, support, challenge, helping a learner become more fully themselves, authentic. But warping is different. Warping is pressure. Warping is bending until you almost break. Warping is forcing adaptation to external molds, whether that material bends naturally or not. If you have to chip off some pieces, so be it, but you will be crammed in that box. When a child learns to fear asking a question, that is not shaping. When a student ties their worth to teacher approval, that is not shaping. When a neurodiverse learner spends more energy appearing regulated than actually learning, that is not shaping. When a teenager believes one bad grade means they are fundamentally less intelligent than the person beside them, that is not shaping. That is human nervous system being bent toward acceptability. And sometimes the room applauds the bend because the bent students are easy to manage. We've talked about compliance before. God, the system loves compliant students, compliant teachers, compliant adults. They're quieter and they know how to perform the dance. But ease of management has never been the same thing as good mental health. We have to be careful that we do not confuse convenient students with well-supported students. Those are not always the same child. So if any part of this feels painfully familiar, I need you to understand something. You are not simply dramatic. You are not simply bad at handling pressure. You are not simply an overthinker who needs to calm down. There is a very real possibility that some of your anxiety was educated into you. That does not mean school causes every wound. It doesn't mean you don't have moments of joy where you connected in the right places with the right people. But what it does mean is that classrooms have far more power than we like to admit when it comes to teaching a nervous system what is safe, what is risky, and what kind of person gets to feel successful inside of the room. And if we are not careful, we can create learners who know how to perform beautifully while quietly they unravel inside and underneath. The hopeful part, and yes, there is one, even when you've already learned the no's and the unsafe parts of it, is that the nervous system can relearn safety too. Rooms can be redesigned and teachers can become aware. Expectations can shift, and learners can be taught that mistakes are survivable, that movement is not defiance, that questions are not weakness, and that worth was never supposed to be tied to the perfect performance. And we'll talk more about these things later, because solutions matter deeply too. But before we can fix that classroom and what those classrooms do to people, we have to be honest about what some classrooms have already done. So, unclench your jaw. You're probably doing it. Drink some water. You're very likely dehydrated like I am. And go remember that your value was never meant to be measured by how perfectly you performed for someone else. And I'll see you back on the next episode of The Human Classroom.